Has the time come to abolish Bosnia's High Representative? For 30 years, ultimate authority in Bosnia and Herzegovina has rested on the shoulders of one person, an international official with sweeping powers to block legislation and dismiss politicians. Created in 1995 to help end the country's brutal war, the role of High Representative has provoked fierce debate. But as a major row rages over the appointment of the next one, many are now asking whether it's time to end the position altogether. Peace agreements often require external involvement to ensure that they work. While this can sometimes be through guarantees or contributions to peacekeeping missions, it can occasionally involve creating an international administration to oversee the post-conflict situation. Usually, though, such institutions are designed as bridges, temporary structures put in place to hold together a fragile peace until local institutions are strong enough to carry the weight by themselves. However, occasionally they can become permanent fixtures, as the very fragility that justifies an outside authority eventually becomes a reason to keep that authority in place indefinitely. Bosnia and Herzegovina's Office of the High Representative is one of the best examples in modern international politics. Created as a way to oversee the country's peace agreement in 1995, 3 decades later, it's now at the centre of a very public standoff between Washington and rival European capitals over who should run it next. A standoff that's forced many to confront the question about whether the role should still exist at all. Situated on the western edge of the Balkans, wedged between Croatia to the north and west and Serbia and Montenegro to the east and south, Bosnia-Herzegovina is a country of roughly 3 million people, constitutionally divided into 2 entities, the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina and Republika Srpska, with a small, separately governed area, the Brčko district, situated between them. Its population is organised around 3 constituent peoples: Bosniaks, once known as Bosnian Muslims, Croats and Serbs, a structure that's enshrined directly in the state's constitution and institutions, right down to a rotating 3-member presidency. The country's complex and fragile political system can be traced to the Dayton Peace Agreement. Signed in Paris in December 1995, this ended a 3.5-year war that killed around 100,000 people and displaced close to 2 million. Under Annex 10 of the Accord, the Office of High Representative was established to oversee the civilian implementation of the settlement. However, while the post was originally intended to be a relatively modest position, coordinating rather than ruling, this changed in 1997 when the Peace Implementation Council, the international body established to support Dayton's implementation, granted the High Representative sweeping new authority. Known as the Bonn Powers, these included the ability to impose or reject laws and to dismiss officials seen as obstructing the peace process. Since then, the holders of the post have exercised that authority in markedly different ways. For example, Wolfgang Petritsch, an Austrian official who held the office from 1999 to 2002, implemented a crucial property law enabling refugees to return. However, he later warned that these powers risk creating a situation in which Bosnian politicians would rely on an outside authority to make the decisions that they wouldn't make themselves. That said, his successor, the British politician Paddy Ashdown, used the Bonn Powers more aggressively than anyone before or since, removing officials en masse in pursuit of state-building reforms. In contrast, Christian Schmidt, who took over from Ashdown, largely refused to use them, resulting in the almost immediate stalling of progress in the country. Thereafter, from 2009 until 2021, the post was held by Valentin Inzko, another Austrian. During this time, the country continued to face deep political problems, as well as growing divisions between the main communities which prevented vital constitutional reform. The Bosnian Serb leadership became increasingly vocal about breaking away. And it was against this backdrop that a German official, Christian Schmidt, controversially took office in 2021, facing open objections from Russia and China, who challenged the legality of his appointment. He used the Bonn Powers to alter electoral law on election night in 2022 to suspend the Federation's constitution for 24 hours to break a government deadlock and to disqualify Republika Srpska's president, Milorad Dodik, from holding public office. I'm just going to take a moment to ask if you wouldn't mind giving the video a like if you're finding it useful, and perhaps consider subscribing if you haven't already. It all really helps the channel to grow. Many thanks, and now back to the video. As a result of all this, what Schmidt left behind was not simply a vacancy, but a genuine diplomatic crisis. While Republika Srpska's leadership, which had never accepted Schmidt's legitimacy in the first place, greeted the resignation with open celebration, the Peace Implementation Council's steering board, the body that appoints the High Representative, was unable to agree a successor. While Washington and Rome favoured a former Italian diplomat, Antonio Zanardi Landi, France and Britain pushed for their own candidates. What seemed to complicate matters were reports that Washington's preference for Landi was tied to a billion-dollar energy project, the so-called Southern Interconnection gas pipeline, awarded without competitive tender to a US firm with reported links to President Trump. This was important as the new appointee would have power to shape land transfers and infrastructure decisions inside the country. All this meant that when the steering board's June meeting in Sarajevo ended without an agreement, Washington publicly blamed European divisions for the deadlock and warned that it might reconsider its role in Bosnia altogether. Although a career American diplomat, Louis Krishock, has been installed as acting High Representative solely to keep the office functioning, there have been growing calls to abolish the post entirely. Indeed, two former representatives, Wolfgang Petritsch and Carl Bildt, a former Swedish Prime Minister, have openly said that international supervision has become obsolete and no longer contributes to Bosnia's stability. So, has the time really come to get rid of the post? As one might imagine, opinions are divided. On the one hand, there's a serious case for keeping the office despite the current deadlock. Bosnia's constitutional architecture, which was essentially designed to end a brutal war rather than to lay the foundations for a long-term functioning state, gives each of the three constituent peoples an effective veto over reform. Despite signs of progress over the first decade, this has now led to political paralysis. In particular, Republika Srpska's leadership has spent much of the past 2 decades treating that veto as a licence to challenge the state's institutions directly. Quite apart from the internal disruption this has caused, it's also holding up Bosnia's European accession talks following decision to grant the country EU candidacy in 2022. To this end, supporters of the office argue that without an external authority capable of imposing decisions when domestic politics is entirely locked up, Bosnia would have no mechanism at all for breaking the kind of stalemate that, in a country where tensions still run high, carries a real risk of violent escalation rather than mere inconvenience. They also point to the concrete achievements that the position has brought about. This includes the imposition of the property law that allowed hundreds of thousands of refugees to return home, the protection of minority political rights that domestic institutions have repeatedly failed to guarantee on their own, and the sheer fact that whatever else has gone wrong, Bosnia hasn't slid back into war in the past 30 years. But balanced against all this is a good argument that it's time to bring the post to an end. Leaving aside the fact that the Bonn Powers have been called unlawful by some legal scholars and are seen as an affront to Bosnia's sovereignty, as highlighted by Petritsch and Bildt, hardly natural critics of the institution, the Bonn Powers have a fundamental flaw. What started out as a temporary measure to oversee post-war stability has fostered a dependency syndrome in which Bosnian politicians of all ethnicities have learned that unpopular decisions can simply be pushed upwards to an outside authority. This relieves them of the need to build the coalitions and compromises that a functioning democracy actually require. Meanwhile, to add to all this, geopolitics is becoming an increasingly important and disruptive factor. Taken on top of Russian and Chinese complaints about Schmidt's appointment, the current succession dispute shows how an office meant to embody neutral, technocratic peace enforcement in a small Balkan country has become a proxy battle for far more serious issues, all at the expense of ordinary Bosnians. Far from imposing peace and stability on Bosnia, the debates over the appointment of a new High Representative have in fact made Bosnia a theatre of growing international divisions and instability. Ultimately, regardless of whether the Peace Implementation Council can agree on who should hold the office, there are very real questions about the post's future. While some argue that it remains a vital tool for maintaining the post-war political balance, especially given recent calls for secession, others insist that the High Representative makes the situation even worse. But regardless of whether the post is in fact still needed, there's another factor to consider. Any new High Representative selected through such bitter bargaining and with the process openly opposed by key parties will arrive in office with their authority already in question. Bosnia and Herzegovina may or may not be ready to govern itself without an external referee. However, the uncomfortable reality, as noted by those who once held the post, is that 30 years after its creation, the position of High Representative is now widely seen as part of Bosnia's wider problems, rather than a way to avoid or resolve them. I hope you found that useful. If so, here are some more videos that you might find interesting. Thanks so much for watching, and see you in the next video.